Hello, and thank you for joining us today for Frost & Sullivan's latest webcast from our Visionary Innovation Group. Today's event is titled Smart City Advancements in the Americas, Profiles of Top Performers. My name is Ana Guerrero, and I oversee Frost & Sullivan's Gale webcast program. Before we begin our event, I'd like to go over a few quick notes. The presentation will be available immediately on demand. You can also share this webcast at any time by clicking on the Share This Webcast within the player. On today's presentation, we will have some detailed slides, so there's a full screen feature available to you at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen. Before I hand the presentation over to today's presenters, I'd like to take a quick second to point out today's presentation is part of a series of conversations on the topic of smart cities from the Visionary Innovation Group. Today's presentation is the last of 4 conversations within this series. We've previously covered an overview of the top performers from our Smart City Scorecard study, as well as deeper looks into smart cities of APAC and Europe. You can access each recording on demand through Bright Talk. Starting off our conversation today, we will begin by defining smart cities. Then we will briefly discuss Visionary Innovation Smart City Scorecard study. This is a study from which many of the slides you see today are adapted. We wanted to give you a bit of a background on these slides as the inspiration for this presentation. Then finally, we'll get into our discussion of smart cities in the Americas. At this time, I'd like to introduce today's presenter, Jillian Walker. Jillian is a senior consultant with the Visionary Innovation Group at Frost & Sullivan. And with that, I'll hand it over to today's presenter, Jillian Walker.
Thank you, Anna, for that introduction. As Anna noted, today's topic concerns smart cities in the Americas. And today we are very happy to have with us Richard Sear to add his knowledge and expertise in smart cities to the conversation. Richard is a partner here at Frost & Sullivan, and he is Senior Vice President of the Visionary Innovation Group. Richard has worked very closely with numerous cities throughout the world, helping them develop their smart city goals and strategies. So we definitely want to thank Richard for adding his expertise to our conversation today. So with that, I do want to take a second and give our audience just a quick overview of the Visionary Innovation team here at Frost & Sullivan. The Visionary Innovation team is dedicated to tracking the mega trends that are impacting businesses and industries and that are really changing how people live their lives and how society and governments operate. The core of our work is in helping our clients understand how these mega trends will impact them 5, 10, 15 years out so that they can strategize now and begin innovating toward that future today. As you can see, the range of topics we cover is quite broad, but today we will be concentrating on a trend called Smart is the New Green, which is really pointing to the fact that our world is becoming increasingly smart. More and more objects are being connected to the internet. Sensor networks are being embedded in various environments. This is allowing us to gather more and more data, allowing objects to respond to the environments that they are in. And as the promise of smart is that by making things smart, by making our environment smart, it will help us do things like drive new efficiencies, prevent problems before they become emergencies, help conserve resources, all of those things that are the objectives and goals of smart cities. Specifically today, we're going to drill down into smart cities, which is taking that smart concept and applying it to the urban environment at large. And in fact, Visionary Innovation has an entire research subscription dedicated to smart cities. You can see a partial list of some of the studies that we've published over the last few years, everything from funding models to region-specific studies like Smart Cities of Africa, Top Smart Cities of Asia. And just to give you a sense of why we have embarked on a series of conversations around smart cities, we recently have published a few key studies on this topic. So first, we've published our Smart City Perspective by Key Region study. which gives quite a bit of perspective about smart cities in North America, Europe, and Asia specifically. And then also, we've recently published our Smart City Scorecard study, and this is a study featured in the middle of your screen. This study looks at 50 global cities, and it filters them through quantitative and qualitative metrics, and then provides some deep dive profiles for the top of 15 cities, smart cities. And you can see what specific pages from this study look like at the bottom of your screen here. Today we'll be highlighting some of the details and exhibits featured in the Smart City Scorecard. Specifically, today we'll be discussing multiple cities in the Americas that landed in the top 15, and a number of other smart cities in the region that are also featured in the Smart City Scorecard. So with that, let's jump right to it, smart cities in the Americas. So we'll start with how visionary innovation defines smart cities. For us, smart cities really are those cities that are integrating information and communication technology into multiple facets of urban life. And they are doing so to accomplish a few goals: to improve the delivery of city services, to improve quality of life for citizens, and long-term to ensure resource sustainability and a prosperous economic outlook. To better understand the various components of a smart city, we do compartmentalize smart city initiatives and technologies into 8 core areas and an enabling area. And these include things like smart governance and education, smart healthcare, smart buildings, smart mobility, smart infrastructure, smart technology, smart energy, smart citizens, smart security. And we really consider cities as pursuing smart city ambitions when they have active pursuits in at least 5 of the areas you see on your screen. And the types of initiatives that smart cities are pursuing range from highly complex and large-scale solutions such as smart grids, intelligent traffic systems, to digital-first solutions such as citizen engagement platforms. On the slide that you see now, you can see some example technologies within the smart city space. So really, the smart city space encompasses a wide array, just a wide ecosystem of solutions and initiatives. Again, all in the name of improving resource efficiency, better delivery of services, higher quality of life, and building greater overall economic sustainability for the city. So quickly, I want to cover the methodology we used in the Visionary Innovation Smart City Scorecard. The way that we approached this benchmarking exercise was to begin at a city set of 50 cities and filter them through a couple of layers of in-depth research. So the first layer, our smart city indicators, is our quantitative layer, which contained 4 indicator categories broken down to about 20 sub-indicators to cross-compare each city. From that filter, we arrived at our top 30 cities. So with these top 30 cities, we applied a second filter. The second filter was more qualitative in nature and based on Visionary Innovation Smart City Maturity Model. This qualitative filter is based on 5 maturity areas that are critical to smart city growth. Areas like governance and investment model, data maturity, Internet of Things. You can see all of our 5 areas on your screen. And this filter, again, took us from the top 30 to the top 15 cities. And so after applying this filter, the bulk of the study really comprises city profiles within each of these maturity model areas, with the goal ultimately to get a better understanding of the kinds of initiatives top smart cities are embarking on and that are really successful for these cities. On your screen now, you can see the results of our scorecard filtering process, with the first 3 rows of the table highlighting the top 15 cities, the middle 3 rows highlighting the top 30 cities, and the rest of the chart you see here highlighting all 50 cities that we included in the filtering process. And those cities with the blue background are the cities from the Americas that we considered in our scorecard. So you can see quite a few cities in the U.S. Made our top 15 list. So Chicago, New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and quite a few more made our top 30. And so with that, I'd like to bring Richard Sear into our conversation. Richard, we looked at 50 cities across the globe in total. Do any of these cities on our list stand out from your perspective, and why?
Yeah, thanks, Julian, and thanks for taking the time to do this. So yeah, I think really just more than just a city perspective, I'm kind of more struck by the prevalence of the Nordic cities in the top 15 and in the top 30 as a whole. And I really think that speaks to the way that Nordic countries focus proportionally more of their time on issues like the environment, citizen happiness, and they actually managed to get ahead of the smart city trend as a whole by working with their citizens and understanding citizen needs. But having said that, there are some very impressive cities other than them that are taking place obviously here in the US. You're seeing a lot in New York happen, significant amount of news for New York and Chicago. And I'm always very impressed by the work being done in complex cities like Seoul and Berlin, where you have extremely aged infrastructure that inhibit the implementation process. So there's a lot of barriers there. So lots of projects, but they tend to be more costly, but they are also taking longer to execute, but it doesn't seem to stand in the way of places like Seoul and Chicago and New York from executing those projects.
So looking at the Americas region specifically, are there any cities not listed here, but that you would include on a list of smart cities to watch? Why should we pay attention to those cities?
Yeah. Well, there are so many cities here in the U.S. In the Americas region that are working on smart city projects. The difference is those that are actively working on citywide visions or those that are sort of experimenting with smart city projects. We just need to be clear that just because a city, says that it is smart, doesn't necessarily make it so from a wider perspective. It's a term that's been quite overused. So to the question that you asked, I am very impressed with the work being done in Portland, in Oregon. They have really worked hard to integrate a smart green initiative around the city, building very strong collaborations with local climate trust as well as the utilities that exist in Portland. And it's made an impact not just across buildings, but overall energy patterns, and now it's making its way into mobility and traffic solutions that, for example, lower the overall amount of emissions. So there you can see a perfect example of a city that has begun its efforts towards smart using one pillar, and that pillar is extending across many other pillars now within the city.
Yeah, so earlier you talked about Nordic cities, and you brought up cities like Seoul and Singapore. So just specifically talking about North America, I'm curious, what would you say makes the smart city approach in North America different from cities, let's say, in regions like Europe or APAC?
Yeah. Well, I think it's severalfold. For one, the nature of U.S. urbanization is very different to that of APAC. It is highly dispersed. A little bit more like Europe in that regard, but in APAC you have very large amounts of people aggregation around major urban areas, so it tends to be far more concentrated. Further, the amount of PPP activity in North America is much clearer here than in other regions, and there's very good reasons for that. For example, you've seen major governmental sponsorship, real money of smart city program funding from the likes of India, China, even the UK, and many others. But in the US, we've had a very different approach. It's much more limited to very small federal government support financially, and local initiatives tend to have to be very much more entrepreneurial. So, one of the areas that is quite frustrating in the US is the relatively low amount of focus given to local budgeting of smart city initiatives. When a city does not have a clear vision, it makes it very hard to then actually budget and plan effectively for what is, for many people, incremental cost to the city. So most visions tend to be, they're more aesthetic than they are technically descriptive. And so as a result, you don't really set the things that you're trying to do in the right direction from the very beginning. So as a result, it tends to lead to a required PPP approach in the North America region, and essentially much more of a project-driven approach, versus in APAC and other places where you see much more holistic approaches taking place.
Yeah, great. Okay, good. So let's move on to the next slide. So we're going to move on to the slide here that highlights U.S. smart city networks, and this is just a sampling of these. So these are cities that belong to either a knowledge-sharing partnership, like with the National Institute of Standards and Technology, superclusters, or have a shared framework, sometimes by virtue of employing the same technology. For instance, the AT&T Smart Cities framework. But I think the real point here is that the smart city movement in the U.S., although it had a late start, is really starting to grow. And this growth is happening quite quickly. So you can see on this map that most major cities in the United States belong to at least one of the networks we have listed. And this is not a complete listing, of all potential networks that could be considered as having a smart city bent, but it gives you a good idea of that growth that we're talking about. And so, Richard, just a quick question for you. When we look at this map of the U.S., we see quite a bit of smart city activity that we might not have seen even 5 years ago. And so the real question here is, what has been driving smart cities in the U.S., and do you see that momentum continuing?
Yeah, very much so. So, I mean, the very thing that drives the U.S. economy itself is competitiveness. And, this has largely in the U.S. been a self-created by the market itself. And you can see that reflected in the slide that you're showing. Ranging from the work that's done at the Council of Mayors level to events that are run like Meeting of the Minds or Emerge Americas. And it's created a major push by U.S. city mayors and policymakers to build out programs or risk being left behind. And that's the true nature of competitiveness. So technology itself has clearly played a major role, Gillian, but self-reporting through social media and the constant always-on culture that we have has meant a much more immediate pressure has been applied from both citizens, who quite frankly are a rising knowledgeable group around this term smart cities, and companies themselves, who are probably the main driver. You mentioned AT&T Smart Cities framework and many of the others. So as a result, you've seen many cities hire innovation teams, digital officers, to try and get more of a handle on this subject, and that's why you're seeing all of these events taking place around the country, and it's having varying levels of success. But I do expect the success to continue.
Yeah, so those are good points. Let's kind of pull back and talk about this on a holistic level. You mentioned some of the advantages, let's say in Europe and APAC, having that holistic push, and certainly U.S. viewers here will be familiar with the tax reform plan that has just been passed. And now we're hearing a lot about how President Trump and Congress will turn their attention to infrastructure, one of the major campaign promises. And one of the major initiatives that we've all kind of been waiting for here. So how do you think a potential infrastructure bill will impact smart cities in the U.S.?
Yeah, well, so that's a very interesting question, especially, a day before his first State of the Union address. And we're already hearing rumors today that we will be seeing, trillion-dollar potential bills. So I think it really all depends on how you view infrastructure, and certainly how the Trump administration will view infrastructure. But, let us be clear that the infrastructure challenges that we have in the United States are extremely deep and wide. We are suffering from some of the poorest quality roads that we've ever seen. Our bridges are decaying. And, core transport infrastructure such as airports are also in a fairly poor shape. Our energy grid security infrastructure is also quite tenuous, and that's a key piece of, the U.S. overall infrastructure. So to try and make this a little bit more useful, I believe we will see direction in terms of whether funds can be used on a sort of more of a gradiating process. Core needs are definitely going to come first. The roads and the bridge repairs that I talked about earlier, and whilst those sound quite simple, they are going to take up a sizable portion of whatever the federal distribution of funds is going to end up looking like. And gradually then, I think we'll start to see, the working through of what I would call sort of upgrades to those systems as we see it over time. So if I was in a position, I would be focusing on ensuring that anything that is worked on is at a minimum forward-thinking, forward-fitted, if you like. So it would allow for the easier integration of a connected environment should this sort of visual switch be triggered at some point, and we make solutions, whether it be roads or bridges or buildings or energy infrastructure, be fitted to the point where they can suddenly become integrated and fully interoperable and connected.
Yeah, great. And that's a great point, because it also brings up the whole role of telecommunications itself as an infrastructure need, which is definitely something that we need to think about moving forward. But I want to get into some of the profiles that we do cover in the Smart City Scorecard. And so just jumping into those, a couple of U.S. cities were featured in our data section. And these are cities that are really showing excellence either in data management or using data to influence public policy. So, for instance, on the slide that you see on your screen, we have New York City and New York City's Mayor's Office of Data Analytics, or MODA. And MODA is really a dedicated analytics team, and you're seeing this more and more cities investing in having that dedicated data team or dedicated analytics team. And for New York City, it's designed to, of course, aggregate data across government agencies to find data-driven solutions to city challenges. And here we can see some of the projects that MODA has worked on, so creating a heat map to better pinpoint housing violations, data around rent stabilization, data around risk-based fire inspection. So again, on one level, it's about breaking down those data silos, but it's also about deploying resources to make sense of that data so that you can have more effective and data-driven policies. Another city that is really concentrating on innovating with data is Los Angeles. So Los Angeles has implemented GeoHub, which is an open data platform that citizens can use to explore and visualize data. And Los Angeles has really been active in using this data to create what it calls data stories. So combining various data sets to tell a cohesive story about a particular topic. And here we profile a data story attached to Vision Zero, which is designed to decrease vehicular-related vehicular-related accidents. But there are also data stories built around public health or road work that's been completed, say, over a decade. The benefit really here of this is to show the public why certain policy decisions are made, as well as generating curiosity and interest around this kind of data that's being collected. And it brings up the whole question about why is data so important to a smart city? And Richard, I'll kind of ask you that. What is the value of data to a smart city?
Well, the answer would seem quite obvious, in this current context, since, data, and we're typically seeing the comparisons to gold, Julian, that many people are using. But the reality is very simple. Data is both a very important piece, but it's also potentially quite catastrophic to cities. So data is not equal. Cities have really drunk what I would call a lot of vendor Kool-Aid on the data solutions that they're providing, and I think that they are seeing the repercussions of that with overwhelmingly large data sets that are now being produced. And that takes ever more powerful compute systems to analyze and find value, and of course that adds to cost for cities, and that can become quite difficult to predict the cost maintenance of many of these data-driven solutions, and that's very dangerous for our cities. So data is extremely valuable so long as you can find the data that can actually point the city in the direction to help citizens and city officials make faster and better decisions. And we should not be proportionally focused our efforts on total data sets versus the usable data sets. And cities need to be working to finance and work with vendors to finance the core piece that is of value.
Absolutely. It can't just be data for data's sake. So just another quick question here. What other ways have you seen cities investing in ways to capitalize on the data that their city is generating?
I think there's some good examples already coming up. I really like the approach of cities like Boston. Of course, they do have the luxury of having 70 or so universities and a great tech industry. But most of the great cities in this country have universities, and they have rising tech industries to work with. But they've really made strides with utilizing an open data platform that they created to the max by working on critical projects with these external entities. So, they've had this innovation district. It was launched under the former mayor Menino. It's been carried on under the current mayor Marty Walsh. That is really doing a great job in creating partnerships that the city is able to utilize and capitalize on sort of the leading edge technology that is coming out of this innovation district. And it really does a very strong job extracting the most useful data from all of the open data platform content that they have. It's a much more of a dedicated system that they have to focus on the valuable data. So they've worked with citizens as well through apps like Street Bump, where they can empower residents as part of what the city calls the civic sensor network. And I love, that term, utilizing citizens as part of their own sensor network. So the best thing about that is that there's no cost. So, very minimal cost involved. So that's a pretty unique way from the way that Boston is doing things.
Great. So let's move on to the next slide. And I want to talk about the Internet of Things. You can't talk about smart cities without nodding to the IoT. So moving on to the Internet of Things and the use of sensors, in particular to gather data about a city that we were previously unable to gather, or that was not as complete. And here we have the City of Chicago and the Array of Things project. And the Array of Things project is really a network of these sensor boxes installed throughout key areas of Chicago. You can see on the map on the left hand of your screen, and the sensors in these nodes are tracking things like traffic and pedestrian flow, air quality, noise pollution, and a whole range of other metrics, all really in the name of gathering this data that, again, will hopefully, if sifted through correctly, will be useful in city policy making and city planning. So, Richard, we talked about the benefit of data. So the question is here, what are the benefit of these kinds of IoT projects? And I think especially the question is over the long term, given that many of the projects like you see here are really still in the early phases of piloting or in development. So I guess the question is, what's that long-term vision of IoT for smart cities?
Well, it ranges, and it ranges quite significantly, but it does depend on whether your IoT vision that you have is connected to a citywide efficiency plan, or if it's just chipping away at issues. Is your IoT plan and your smart city plan one of the same thing, or are they, disconnected? Of course, it's more complex to attempt citywide integration. So it is understandable that cities run projects and then retro-connect them together. But IoT in the long term should be less about the things, the little pieces that are there, and more about those things working together, which is why my fear for cities is that they will have challenges doing that if they do not set the right IoT vision to begin with. If you begin with a chipping away process, you will have a retro interoperability issue, and you will suffer in your larger smart city program vision. But I understand it. Cities are tempted by vendors who come in and promise lots of things to test their equipment in the city, and that's a good thing. But they do end up with a variety of disparate systems, and that isn't necessarily a good thing.
Okay, great. Well, let's sort of switch gears here and talk about another area that we look at in our Smart Cities scorecard, and that is thinking about the business model or the business cases of smart cities. And by that, we mean the initiatives put in place to stimulate the city's growth and the long-term sustainability, particularly around economic activity. So any form of smart city recognition or quantified value add for smart city implementation or pursuits would be, I think, exhibitive of a successful business model. And one of the cities that has, I think, been really strong in this area is San Francisco, whether that's by design or default. I mean, it does have a very strong, obviously strong tech community. But San Francisco, I think, is really capitalizing on that. It's developing innovative smart city solutions that are producing tangible cost savings for citizens that are being replicated in a number of other cities. And some of those initiatives are outlined here. For instance, the STIR program or Startup in Residence program, which San Francisco launched, but it has since spread to other cities, and is all about giving startups the opportunity to help cities solve challenges. And unlike, let's say, a hackathon, which you see quite frequently, with STIR, these are extended opportunities, 4 months or so working directly with cities. And of course, this sort of program furthers San Francisco's reputation as the national startup hub. Another set of initiatives that we can classify under this business model area are aimed at improving congestion and traffic in San Francisco, aimed at reducing pollution, improving citizen convenience, again, in a very quantified, value-added way. And then you have this San Francisco business portal, which is really an innovative way of providing these sorts of startup kits online for very common types of small businesses. So again, really trying to stimulate the local economy by supporting and making entrepreneurship easy. So Richard, one of the critical motivations for smart cities, again, is securing that economic resiliency and sustainability. Here we're discussing San Francisco, but what other cities are you seeing investing in smart city concepts with the goal of the city's economic prosperity in mind?
Yeah. Well, obviously in the report that you've done, Gillian, you have classic cases like New York and Seattle, but here I'd like to kind of focus on a different approach, maybe somewhere like a Roanoke, Virginia. What I really like there, I think it's just a little bit more relatable to the majority of the cities that that we have in the U.S. Tend to be medium-sized and small-sized cities. And what I really like there is the intense focus on people and technology, where the overall goal is to make Roanoke one of the easiest places to live, not necessarily best places to live. It's really the easiest place. And by doing so, that they're really trying to connect the citizens together. So they have one of the strongest social media engagement platforms that you could find nationally. Virtually every single one of the office and government departments are connected to some form of social media platform in whichever form that may be, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and so on and so on. And in doing so, the citizens there have signed up. They are networking with government, and they have a very clear two-way communication channel, extremely accessible to work on everything from a citizen need to potholes and snow challenges. And what they've found is that citizens find the city a highly livable, easy place to connect with, and they feel like they have a direct channel to government. And that really is a quest for large cities, which is achievable, but obviously on a much larger scale.
Yeah, great. I mean, you bring up a really, really good point about, sometimes we tend to focus on these cities like New York or Seattle or San Francisco, but in reality, it's these smaller cities where ultimately the majority of U.S. citizens live, and making smart city initiatives accessible to those cities is, of course, incredibly important. So just kind of in conclusion here, we spent a lot of time talking about the U.S. and smart cities in the U.S., but here we have a map of Canada and of Latin America. So just out of curiosity, how are the smart cities taking shape in these areas? And I think in particular, how are smart cities in Latin America, let's say, different from those in the U.S. or Canada?
Yeah, I mean, to look at Canada first, I mean, they've been very busy of late. They announced their Smart Cities Challenge, which I believe has a due date of end of April for entries to submit for government funding. They're awarding a grand prize, I believe it's of $50 million. I think the fund total is $75 million, so the additional $25 million are for a targeted focus towards different size cities, which I think is phenomenal. The $50 million, by the way, though, is interesting because that's being awarded to a city of any size. So no matter what you are, whether you are a mid-sized city like we just talked about, Gillian, or whether you're a large city, you're eligible for that $50 million grand prize impetus. But, I would expect to see, obviously, Montreal, Toronto, Calgary lead most of the bidding. You've got Quebec City there. They're also doing some very strong initiatives. Toronto, you've seen, obviously, with Sidewalk Labs, the part of Alphabet. So, yeah, strong there. But Latin America is a very, very different challenge. Government in many countries in Latin America obviously have some problems sometimes in terms of where funds go, where they have access to, and they don't necessarily get directed to where they traditionally were intended to. So, you've got some implementation problems on a wider scale in Latin America because of some of the bureaucracy problems that do exist down there. But if you put that aside, you do have some standouts. I love that Rio de Janeiro, obviously in Brazil, has a chief digital officer. They've had one now for many years. I know him personally, and that's really been a phenomenal effort to help the connectivity issues there and the use of technology become much more engaging across all of Rio. And really, they have focused on a total Rio approach versus sort of just small areas and trying to build that out. You have standout cities like Guadalajara in Mexico that really have benefited from a very strong technology climate, companies that are there, and really strong technology leadership. And then you've got places like Panama City, where Mayor Figueroa has worked on free online access through its Internet for All initiative that's in partnership, I believe, with Cisco. And that's enabled a lot of the city to collect a lot more data, connecting and using its citizens as a platform for growth. So somewhat similar to the things that I was talking about in Boston, but not quite at the level yet, but it's certainly getting there. The citizens are saved a lot more time because of this. It's much more efficient as a city running, and the city is seeing some cost-saving benefits.
Okay, great. And so just to kind of sum up here from the report that we finished, so the three general characteristics that we found to be very, very important to smart city growth in the Americas, and one is, of course, the importance of cities of having a cohesive strategy and defined goals, usually with some level of quantitative metrics in there. And I would say that most cities in the Americas are a bit behind those in, let's say, Europe in terms of actually laying out a very robust strategy with goals and, importantly, in dedicating resources to ensuring that strategy is enacted. However, we are seeing that start to change. Cities are starting to become a lot more organized in their smart city development. So hopefully that trend will continue. Another key takeaway is the importance of smart city networks. We saw that slide earlier in the presentation. So these networks, the importance of them to drive growth, smart city growth, and to cross-pollinate best practices. And I think that's one of the really important aspects of those networks, is that they allow for best practices to be shared quite quickly across various cities. And those really are growing in the U.S. And then finally, of course, the importance of data really starting to be embraced by some of these mega smart cities in the U.S. And elsewhere, like you just pointed out. And and this trend will continue to grow. You see cities, again, hiring more chief data officers to help ensure that data is aggregated and integrated, made accessible, but even more importantly, made usable by public agencies. So, Richard, would you like to add any to this list of differentiators for smart cities in the Americas?
Yeah, I think I think the biggest danger that we have here is the biggest danger that we have beyond just city approaches. So this is an issue, I think, for most corporations, but cities are at higher risk for this. When we think about technology reaching a point of maturity, it really has. And there is a proliferation of technology now that exists, and predominantly the approach has been this sort of data officer, digital officer approach. Innovation officers have primarily been, digital officers, testing in digital opportunities. We need to focus back on citizens and us as human beings. We still make up the cities. That's the fabric of what we are. And really, that's where we need to be focusing our efforts. How can we blend technology with real human needs? And if you can focus on what I would call a digital human-first approach, I think you have a true differentiation opportunity ahead of you.
Great. So just one final question. So what would you like vendors and solution providers who are listening to this webcast take away today?
Well, they've got to continue evolving the way that they work with cities, and especially focus more of their time on the business model integration side of things. So if you're going to differentiate what you're doing, the technology having a 0.1% more efficacy isn't necessarily going to win you the contract. So I would love to see more effort on working on business models. And as I said before, I think technology itself has become very normalized. We need to get beyond sort of the more gimmick approach, and I've seen very little core technology of late in the last couple of years that is really highly differentiated. I feel like we still have very much the similar kind of products and services and solutions being positioned to cities. I haven't seen a whole lot of differentiation. So the focus must be on business models, because that's where I believe it can take place and where most value can be added by our vendors and solution providers. So we're all doing an excellent job. Just would like to see it pushed a little harder.
Great. Well, thanks so much. So if anyone would like to get in touch with either Richard or myself, we do have our contact information available on the slide that you see in front of you. So please remember that we do have our other Smart City recordings that are available on demand right now. So with that, we will go back to Anna.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Jillian. Yes, this concludes today's webcast. We hope you found it informative. Again, feel free to contact us with any questions or additional feedback. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.